Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Learn with Jason. Today on the show, we've got a whole lot of fun stuff coming up. This is I think, a super interesting episode because it's going to dive into a little bit of the workings of open source. It's going to dive a little bit into how you can use one of the most popular frameworks in the industry right now on any platform you want without any vendor lock-in. And here to teach us about it is Rob Standford. Rob, how you doing today?
Hey, Jason. Yeah, I'm doing good. Thanks.
I'm super happy to have you on the show. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. For those who aren't familiar with you and your work, do you want to give us a bit of a background on who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Rob. I'm a senior engineer on the frameworks team at Netlify. For anyone who's not aware, Netlify is a web platform for composable websites. Our core proposition is to remove the friction from building and deploying and running modern websites. So we make it easier and faster to build websites, basically. Plus with other parts of the platform, like helping developers to unify their data and content, and helping content editors to publish content visually. But in the framework team, our role is to make sure that whatever framework you choose, whether that's Next.js or Astro or Remix or Nuxt, the features of that framework work seamlessly when you deploy to Netlify.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've always had a soft spot for Netlify. It was I worked there for a while. I left in 2022, and the frameworks team especially is something near and dear to my heart because that was a team that started with my old team. Sarah Drasner kind of kicked that off as a team inside of the developer experience org, which has now grown up and moved on. It's in engineering. It's you're reporting to Claire Knight, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And Claire Knight is like one of my favorite people, one of the best engineering managers I've ever met in my entire life. Just a truly stellar human. And so, lots of love for the Netlify team. But let's talk a little bit about like what it means to run a framework on a different platform, because I think one of the most interesting things to me is when I was first getting started as a dev, it didn't really make sense to have a framework be platform specific. It was like, well, it ran in PHP or it ran in Node, and you would just, if you had a Node server, you could run it, right? And that's less and less true these days, but I don't know that I understand why. So maybe the first question is, why is it hard to deploy Next.js somewhere other than Vercel?
Sure. It's probably worth mentioning, we're talking about frameworks here. We're talking about meta frameworks, really, because we're talking about frameworks that don't just have a UI part, a sort of front-end UI part. They have back-end routing and rendering to consider, and that all needs to be connected to the kind of infrastructure components of the platform that you want to deploy to. And most modern frameworks have the concept of different deploy targets. So if you want to deploy your website to Netlify or indeed any other platform, for your chosen framework, you'll tend to find there are a number of adapters which you can use. And what they'll do is they kind of provide a sort of first-class interface for transforming the build output into a format that your platform of choice can deploy, and then set up the right web architecture to support it. And Next.js is a little bit of an outlier in this regard because it doesn't have the concept of deploy targets. You can deploy a Next.js site to Vercel, or you can self-host it. That's really the key difference. If you self-host it, then you're basically running Next.js building Next.js in standalone mode, which kind of bundles up all your code, creates a little kind of Node.js server file, and then you're expected yourself to upload that to some long-running box infrastructure server that you've got running somewhere. And that comes with a whole host of disadvantages. You get the flexibility, but then you've got to set the box up, you've got to maintain it, you've got security to think about, scalability and performance as well, which is the key thing, because this box that you're running your Next.js server on could be geographically located miles away from some of your customers, and so there's a whole host of things to think about. And most developers will be wanting to consider hosting in a serverless environment for mitigating those issues.
Yeah, and so people are saying here, like Ryan's deployed a Next.js site to Firebase. Brendan runs it on Render, and so in that case, I mean, I'm not going to say that I know exactly how they're deploying it, but my hunch is that that's running in standalone mode.
Yeah.
And so I guess to clarify a little bit, when you talked about adapters, and what I understand that to mean is, I talk a lot about Astro. I like Astro. And so when I deploy Astro, I say, I use the Astro CLI, and I say Astro add Netlify, or Astro add Vercel, or Astro add Render, or whatever it is. And it goes out and it gets this adapter file that goes into the config that basically tells Astro which platform it's being deployed to. And then the platform owners are able to write code that tells the platform how best, or tells Astro how to best prepare itself as part of the build to take advantage of all the features of Astro on a given platform. Is that the right, am I understanding that correctly, how that works?
Yeah, nailed it.
Okay. And so the difference then is that, if you look at Astro, if you look at Remix, if you look at Nuxt, if you look at Solid, or most I think most meta frameworks out there these days, they all have this adapter API, with the notable exception of Next. Next does not have an adapter API.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so I guess then you talked about standalone mode in Next. And so is standalone mode, is that like feature complete Next? Because when I hear people talk about Next, I hear them talking about the edge. I hear them talking about the way that the API routes work, about the caching, about these. There's a lot of 3-letter acronyms that come out of Vercel and Next that I think I keep, like, there's things like ISR, and there's things like SSR, and there's so do those all work in standalone mode?
Absolutely. It's feature complete,
Okay.
but there are considerations, mainly performance considerations. So ISR works, for example. ISR is essentially a caching layer. It's like this hybrid between static rendering and dynamic rendering.
And it's short for incremental static regeneration?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And essentially what it means is you're pre-rendering your content at build time, which then gets served statically from a cache, but you can dynamically re-render that content at request time, either on a time-based interval or on demand. ISR is a kind of caching mechanism. If you self-host, you essentially are running that cache at the origin server that you're running it on. Whereas if you host on a serverless platform like Netlify, then you can run that cache on the edge close to your users. So you're going to get much, much less latency, much better performance. The same is true of things like middleware, for example. When you're running in standalone mode, then you're going to be running your middleware at the origin. So you can't perform things, close to the users. There's a lot about performance in there.
And then, as in standalone mode, you can't so for example, if you tried to run standalone mode on Netlify, it would put all of Next.js into a serverless function or something, and then you're kind of hooked on you don't get to use any of the extra features of the CDN, the edge, the stuff like that, because it has no way of knowing about them, because it's kind of I guess when you ship one bundle for everywhere that's not Vercel, you kind of have to ship to the lowest common denominator, which would be what, a Linode server, like a VPS that has no extra. It's like a server box sitting on a rack somewhere in US East 2. And
Exactly.
if it can't be supported there, then it doesn't. You can't add the extra features. And so this is where why the adapter API is so important, and why it's it's like why it's part of so many frameworks is like you want your framework to work well on other platforms. So without getting into the whys of like why would the Next.js team not want to ship an adapter API, let's instead talk about how you work around that. So at Netlify to ship Next, you have found a way to, you know, give that same like edge functions, geographically distributed compute, CDN, all those pieces that does all work on Netlify now.
Exactly. Yeah. Feature complete, and you've got, you know, the goal of the next runtime v5, which is what we've just launched, is that we wanted feature parity, obviously, with Vercel, but we also wanted performance parity. We wanted this to feel like an experience that Next.js developers would expect.
Okay, cool. So that then kind of gets into the meat of what I want to talk to you about today, which is they don't provide an adapter API. So how did you do this?
Well, they don't provide an adapter API, but Next.js is an open source project. So it's possible to examine the code and understand it deeply, which is the work of myself and the amazing team at Netlify. What we can do is we can take the build output of Next.js, and we can make some small transformations to that in order to move content to the right places, essentially. What we've built is that we call the Next runtime. It essentially does four things. We isolate the static assets in your site. So that's things like CSS, images, and so on and so forth, things that aren't going to change within a single deployment. And we move them to a location so they can be deployed directly to the CDN on the edge. And then secondly, we isolate the pre-rendered HTML and the page data that goes along with it, like the React server component data. And we put that into blob storage, which is a new platform primitive that Netlify offer. And then thirdly, we create the code for a serverless function that will handle requests at runtime. So that's the dynamic rendering part. And fourth, we create the code for an edge function, which will run your middleware on the edge. So all of this is essentially what we do, and it's a build time transformation, essentially.
And then is this like, so if Next provided an adapter API, this is what it would ask you, is like, where do we put the middleware? Where do we put the dynamic code? Where do we put the static assets? So you've effectively just sort of in user land built an adapter API for Netlify.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Do you suspect that like, is this has got to be about the same thing that's happening behind the scenes at Vercel too? Like, because they presumably aren't using a different build of Next. So they've probably just got their own home rolled adapter API that they're using to do roughly the same thing, optimized for Vercel's servers.
Exactly that. In fact, Vercel has something called the build output API, which is documented, and it roughly conforms to the output of your docs.next folder when you run a Next.js build. So essentially, a Next.js build is already in the format for it to be deployed to Vercel and sort of create the right bits of web architecture.
Got it. Okay.
We just rearrange things slightly so that it's then in the right format for a Netlify build.
Okay, so then we're not talking about like building custom stuff on Netlify. We're just talking about rearranging the build output so that it ends up in the right places to function properly.
Yeah, exactly. Plus, the most of the work is in the runtime cache handling. So there is, like I said, build time component where we're moving things so that the right things get into the right parts of the Netlify infrastructure. But then at runtime, because App Router is so different to Pages Router, basically all of the routes go straight through to your dynamic function, but there's just multiple levels of caching in front of it. There's 4 levels of caching, in fact, the Next.js uses, which I know, it's interesting, and it's a lot to reason around. I mean, Next.js tries to configure this all automatically, heuristically, based on your code. But as we've seen in a lot of the feedback that Next have got, and actually some of the changes that they're making in Next 15, the caching is complicated. People shouldn't have to worry about it, but they do inevitably. I think it would be good to touch on that maybe later on, some of the complexities around caching.
I do know that whenever I use Next.js after they added the app router, that I seem to struggle a lot with some of the automatic caching stuff, because it kind of catches me. It doesn't work the way I expect it to, and then I'm confused as to why I'm not seeing my changes. And it's because something was cached. So yeah, and there's a reason that caching is often joked about as like the hardest problem in computer science, and it's because it is absolutely like brain meltingly hard when you start thinking about caches beyond one layer. Like if you think about it as a CDN, easy, simple. When you start thinking about something that relies on a CDN, but also the cache of the CDN, and a serverless function, but also the cache of the serverless function, and an edge network, but also the cache of the edge network, suddenly you've got this multivariate exploding complexity problem. And I don't even think our brains can handle the number of variations that can happen when caching gets beyond 3 or 4 levels. And so, yeah, of course we're going to cause problems for ourselves if we're trying to manage it manually. I mean, this is, again, I think one of the features that was so brilliant about Netlify in the early days of Vercel and things like Cloudflare is it's like, look, just put your stuff here and it's cached. And you don't have to manage it anymore. We've already figured this stuff out, so that your caching idea is upload, and we'll make sure everybody gets the new file. And that's it. That's all you have to think about. And it really kind of caught me off guard when I started seeing the arguments being made in JavaScript land for like, oh, just manage your own cache headers. I was like, no, wait. Do you forget what this used to be like?
Yeah. Absolutely, 100% agree, and it is really interesting because I think like the modern sort of web frameworks have evolved a little bit, and whilst there are more complicated caching requirements now coming from the developer community, people want to have more control. We just need to find ways to do that where we don't introduce foot guns and people don't have to think too hard about it. And that's what we've tried to do with some of these new caching primitives that we've got at Netlify. And these are the same kind of, when I say primitives, I'm talking about platform features. These are the same features that we've leveraged in the Next.js runtime.
And I don't want to go like too off the rails here, but I do think this is really interesting. And I got the chance to talk to Matt Billman, the CEO of Netlify, about this. And one thing that I thought was really interesting was that where it feels like there are sort of 2 directions that you can take when you're building. And one is to optimize a platform for that platform's thing. And a good example of this is like WordPress hosting. There is a huge amount of hosting that is highly optimized to run WordPress specifically because of its popularity, right? And then Vercel has, I don't think quite as heavily focused, but there's still that general sense of like, this is tuned for Next.js because that's the framework they build. And then there's the opposite way to look at it is like, let's build these low level primitives that work everywhere. And I think that's the approach that we've seen from Cloudflare, for example. They don't build frameworks; they build primitives that often those primitives are so low level that you have to build a framework on top of them to make them usable by normal mortals like me. Sure. And I think that Netlify has kind of taken a really interesting approach where it's these primitives are for every framework, and the primitives that you just talked about that are being used to make this Next adapter, those are the exact same pieces that are powering Astro or Nuxt or Svelte or Solid or anything else that gets deployed to Netlify, even vanilla HTML. But they're made in such a way that they don't have to be tuned specifically. They're tuned for the web, like the web use case. And I think to me, that is a really fascinating way of taking it. And it's also, it's like it's a long game. Like it's a challenging game to play when you bet on the web because you can't own it, right? Like it's a thing you can't like jack up the price on the internet as a company that builds for the internet. Like you got to own the ISP for that, and that's not that's never going to be us. So then it kind of, it's this bet on the open web that I think is really interesting, but long term it is, I think, the safer bet, because my career, I've been around for a little over 20 years. And in that time, I've seen the frameworks turn over multiple times, and the web has never turned over, like with still HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And I think that's going to continue to be true. So to me, it's kind of like that old saying, like, you never get fired for betting on IBM. Well, you never get fired for betting on the web. Right.
Absolutely, 100%. And this has always been our sort of driving goal at Netlify, to kind of promote the open web, I suppose. And that's why when we were thinking about these new platform primitives, we weren't thinking about how do we make the runtime for Next.js work? How can we kind of do that? It was more kind of, what can we build on our platform that can serve the Next.js runtime, but also all of the other frameworks? Because, yeah, I mean, for obvious reasons, the more frameworks that are out there for developers, the more choice and more innovation. It's just something that we are keen to promote.
Yeah, and I promise I'm going to move on here after this, but I just wanted to call out one more thing, which is that there was this recent, I think, huge leap forward in frameworks. And it was the sort of rebirth of signals and the rethinking of how we manage state, and like really moving past what I think was like a local maximum for how we did state, where we'd kind of like settled on some things, but we weren't really happy with any of them. And then all of a sudden we get Quick and we get Solid and we get the Angular team starting to innovate a little bit, and we're all suddenly looking at like, well, wait, what about signals? What if we didn't have like the drawbacks of what the React hooks are doing, which they've now solved in the React compiler? And the Angular team was looking at the way that they were implementing state, and they brought in signals, and suddenly we're starting to see this like big leap forward where the API of all of these frameworks improved, because we had the diversity of lots of different people borrowing ideas and trying something new. And there's lower risk in something like Quick or Solid, because they don't have the giant production user bases that'll really be hurt if something goes off the rails. They can still be pretty agile, and once we've proven it out in something like Solid or Quick, then the bigger frameworks can start to say, wait, that's actually really good, and we should do that. And they can start bringing it in safe ways, and it's validated, so they can actually prove the point. So I think, yeah, the broadness of this space can feel exhausting when you're a developer, because there are so many things that you feel like you need to keep up on and you need to care about. But it's also such a strength, right? And I think there's a discourse going on right now about how like Rails and Laravel are complete, almost feature complete. You don't have to choose ecosystem tools because they just do it.
Yeah.
And that is amazing. Like the velocity you can move at with one of those is truly impressive. And in the same breath, the absolute diversity of the ecosystem in JavaScript is a strength. Like it's got trade-offs like anything else. But the fact that we are out here trying things, innovating, seeing if we can push the envelope, seeing if we can challenge what we've accepted as being the best way to do things, has led to some incredible innovation. And if you look at JavaScript today versus JavaScript 10 years ago, it's like a completely different landscape. And I think that, so yeah, I just a little word of calm and happiness to go to anybody who's feeling stressed out about the state of things today is that it can feel chaotic, but it is, in fact, it is making things better. So, Rob, my little diatribe aside, I am very. Hold on. First, I have to be very upset at Phil Hawksworth.
I noticed this.
First of all, how dare you? Okay, so I could probably talk about this quite literally for the rest of today without taking a breath, but I want to actually try this out. So if I want to get started, do you mind if I bring us over into computer mode and we start doing some things?
Let's do it.
All right, here we go. So I'm going to first and foremost give a quick shout out to Rob. Let me do the LinkedIn link again, and we'll get that into the chat here. So make sure you go and give Rob it's not a follow, it's a connection now. So go make a connection, make a friend. And then this episode, like every episode, is being live captioned. We've got Vanessa here from White Coat Captioning. Thank you so much. You can find the link to it down there on the bottom. And with that, I'm ready. I want to do some stuff. So, what's the first thing that I should do here if I want to if I want to make some next stuff happen?
Sure. Well, let's fire up a vanilla Next.js site and get it deployed to Netlify.
All right. So I'm going to npm create Next.js.
npm create next-app.
Next app.
That's the one.
And we're going to call this Next without Vercel. We will use TypeScript. Sure. We'll use ESLint. No, I should have just kept all of the defaults. Should we use the pages or the appdir?
Let's use appdir since it's
okay. I don't like those import aliases. They always confuse me. Give me a relative file path any day. I don't care if it's 99 dots long. Okay, so then I'm going to get into my folder here, Next.js without Vercel. And do I need to install now? It's installed.
Yeah, you're all done. You can go.
Okay.
Yeah, if you're in there, you can bring up the code.
All right, so let's open this up, and then I'm going to close this one. And let me initialize that so we can actually see what's going on. And then let's take a look in here. And all right, so we're running Next 14, React 18, and all the config stuff to make that work. So how do I deploy this to Netlify?
Sure. So you've got a couple of options. You can go down the CLI route if that's your jam, or you can go through the UI and create a site. So what's your flavor?
Why don't we let's do the CLI. That sounds fun. And what I'm going to do, in fact, is I'm going to just dump all of the homepage stuff. We'll just get rid of that, and we'll say we'll just do a nice simple one. Let me deploy this, or let's run it and make sure that I didn't just break that site when I did that.
Sure.
Okay, so we're running localhost 3000. Okay, so nice and simple, but it works. So
cool. Before you deploy, because we're doing this via CLI, we need to install the Next.js runtime. So you're going to need to add a little netlify.toml file.
Oh, wait. Okay, hold on. Do I... What are my options again?
Sure. So we can go to the Netlify UI and we can create a site that way.
Yeah. Why don't we do that? Because I think that's kind of nice to see. So let me. I did the git init. Let me make sure there's nothing. No. Okay. So I'm gonna git add everything, and we're gonna say git commit, and we'll say initial commit. Okay. So then I'm going to create a repo.
Yep.
And we want to push the existing one. We're going to do this one there. We're going to send it to the learn with JSON. Yes, I should probably make an alias that has all the right flags to just do this for me, because I do it exactly the same every time.
Sure.
Then I can, did I already push that? Yes. Okay. So now we've got this repo here. So I'm going to copy paste this. I'm going to head out here. And there's our repo. So I'll do a quick one of those. Okay. And then I'm going to go to the Netlify site.
That's it.
All right. And add a new site.
You got it.
Okay. GitHub. And And I have like 900 repos on here, so there it is.
And this will detect that that's a Next.js site. Should be able to use most of the defaults apart from the name.
Nice. Okay. And I didn't change any defaults, so it should just kind of run, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I didn't add any environment variables, but it's cool. This wasn't here when I left Netlify, so I'm very happy to see this. This is nice.
Cool. So yeah, that's the difference. If we did that via the CLI method, we just have to tell the build process that we want to use the next runtime, but we can gloss over that.
Oh, okay. Cool. I mean, so the reason I wanted to come in here is I love not having to use a netlify.toml. Like it's so nice to just be able to say like, it just worked. Okay, what failed? Should we use this thing?
Yeah, go for it.
I'm not gonna do that right now. Or does it just work if I hit this button? Oh, I see. Due to a dependency conflict related to ESLint versions. What does that mean? Next, you did this.
How interesting.
Could not resolve. All right, whatever. We're just going to run one more npm install here and see if I can. Did nothing even changed. Okay, so that's not ideal. ESLint 857. 856. Cool.
Interesting.
ESLint 9.
So what version of Next are you using there? You were using 14.2.3, weren't you?
I think so. 14.2.3.
Yeah.
And it's saying use ESLint 9.3.0, but all of the peer dependencies inside of their types packages, like the TypeScript ESLint and the other one, ESLint, they're all saying 857. So why don't I do this? And I'm just going to fix it.
So this is in your dependency. It's interesting because when I put up Next.js build together earlier on, we didn't have that ESLint stuff in the dependency. So that must be something quite new.
What are you doing? Leave me alone. Why did I install ESLint? ESLint was a mistake. I shouldn't have done this. Can I just turn it off?
I tell you what we could do. We could just create another site without ESLint for now.
Yeah, why don't we just do that? That seems way better than whatever the heck is going on here, because how is this broken out of the create next app thing? Okay, so let me remove here, and then we're going to npm create next app. Let me see if maybe it was like I had something out of date here, and we're going to put it in here. Okay, to proceed. I do want TypeScript. I do not want ESLint. Get out of my house. Keep the app router.
You got it.
Don't want a thingy. Installing dependencies. Then we're going to get into this folder. I'm going to get init, and then this time I want to actually, how are we going to do this? Get remote, add origin, and we're going to do git at github.com. Can I remember this on the first try? Let's find out. Learn with Jason, next.git. Then I'm going to git add everything. I'm going to git commit. And then we're going to git push force.
Love it.
Oh, wait. I'll get out of here. There we go. All right. So almost remember that first try. Then this should be deploying without ESLint.
Cool.
And now our dependencies should match, I hope.
Yeah, exactly. And what we should get is just that static page, because that is what it is. We're not fetching any data or anything like that. So this should be statically rendered at build time, which is what's going to happen during the next JS build process. And then we're going to make sure that that goes up to the blob storage, and then is cached on the way out. But let's see it rolling first, and then we can talk a bit more.
Yeah, it looks like it's doing the thing now. And also there was a really good suggestion in YouTube to just use legacy peer deps, which I did not even remember worked. So thank you for that. Would have saved us some heartache. Hopefully this also works. Infra as code all day. I mean, I do like infra as code. It's not bad. Let's see. All right.
Okay.
Complete. All right. Is our site up and running here? Let's go site overview. We're going to pop this one open, and I didn't change anything. So yeah, this is like a straight up default thing.
Okay.
But hey, it works. So now y'all can see that once we get our dependencies cooperating, it just worked. It did the thing. So good deal. All right, everybody's happy. All the stuff did what we wanted it to do. And these are all external links. I thought those were pages. Never mind.
Yeah, I know. It looks like it.
Okay. So then what should we do next?
So what we've got there, yeah. I mean, it might just be worth quickly explaining that what's going on in the runtime, like I was saying earlier, it's funny in App Router. You haven't got such a sort of clear delineation between a statically rendered page and a dynamically rendered page, because this page here is a statically rendered page. We can see that because we've got we're not fetching any data or anything like that. But the interesting thing in App Router is that you can on-demand revalidate any page, even a static page. So in theory, you could on-demand revalidate this page, although obviously it wouldn't change. So I'm wondering should we stick a little timestamp in and then we can kind of see that in action. If we put a timestamp just in some text somewhere.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm just going to do the same thing that I did before, and let me knock out this stuff here, and we'll say, and then we can do new date. Let's do new date to locale date string, to locale string would give us both. Yeah, that's what I want.
Cool.
And then to make sure that I remember how computers work, let's run this locally for a second before we deploy it. I'll head back over here and check my local site. Okay. And now we get, every time I reload, we can see that the seconds are increasing.
And this is a point to note, because when you run things in dev mode, which is what you're doing there, there is no caching applied. So everything is dynamically rendered. So that's what you're seeing there. We've got a timestamp on our static page, and you might expect it not to change, but it is going to in dev mode. But when we deploy this to Netlify, you'll see that timestamp should remain fixed because the page is cached.
Yes, and I the reason I just did what I just did is I was seeing that 3000 must be the same port that Quick uses, and we were getting this 404 on a service worker that's not there because we're not running Quick. So I just cleared all the storage on my local host 3000 so that we aren't having anything weird going on.
Gotcha. Yeah, we had some feedback from the folks back at Netlify wondering whether it might have been some like global legacy peer deps or something like that going on with the ESX.
Okay. Cool. Okay, but so now we're in good shape here because we've got the site running. We're getting our dates, and because we're in the dev server, it's updating on every build or every refresh. And so if we then, why did I stop that? I should have kept that open. If I stop this, and we'll say git commit and update homepage.
Yep.
And we'll push.
Sure.
And then out here, it'll build. And so it took about 49 seconds last time. So theoretically, it should be maybe even a little bit quicker this time because it won't have to install the dependencies.
Exactly, and it'll be using a build cache this time. But whilst it's building, I can talk because what we're going to see here is because we've got no content on that page, Next.js serves up. It knows that there's nothing that's sort of changing on that page. It doesn't understand that the timestamp is something that you might want to see refreshed. So it will respond with a response that has a stale while revalidate header in it. And it has a stale while sort of max age of a year, which is essentially an infinite, for an infinite period of time, as far as a deploy is concerned. And so our next runtime intercepts that response and adds a Netlify CDN cache control header, which makes sure that that caching only applies on our CDN and doesn't come through to the browser.
Yep, and now we're cached.
Exactly, yeah. That's cached on the edge, and it will be cached for a year.
Great. So for something that is static, which, if we're being honest, the vast majority of web pages are static, then this is exactly what we want. But let's say that we did, in fact, want this to update every time you refresh the page. How would I support that? Because so which acronym is it when we want that? Is that ISR?
It's a funny one. It's SSR in the Next.js parlance, although it's funny because in theory, everything is SSR rendered, because even the stuff that you're statically building at build time is rendered with the server. But anyway, we'll skip over that. They call it SSR.
Okay. So then if I guess what do if I want to mark this as dynamic. So how do I make this page dynamic?
Sure. So in this instance, Next.js hasn't been able to work out with its heuristics that you want this dynamic. So you can force this. You need to export a const, which is called dynamic. And that value, well, yeah, you'd think so, wouldn't you? It's actually a string value of force dynamic.
Oh, okay. What are the other values?
That's a very good question. Whilst you deploy, I'll look it up.
Okay, so this time we're going to say make homepage dynamic. Did I commit that? Oh, no, I didn't. Git add all, and then we'll run that. Push. Okay. So now that's going to build.
Yeah. So yeah, the other ones are, of course, for static, which is something probably best not to get into yet, because it's also not quite what it appears to be. But yeah, essentially, this is where the Next.js caching is clever, but sometimes you need to know how to nudge it in certain directions.
And I mean, and I can see, like, I think this is one of the things that is both like very powerful and also very, I think, to me, like, troubling about Next.js is that you can quite literally do anything with it, and it's not always super clear, like, what the thing, like, why it should be used or when it should be used. And so it becomes like one of the problems that I had when I was at IBM, for example, is that we would spend a lot of time building things that were very flexible. And then the only way that we could enforce things was through, like, really cumbersome QA processes, because you needed a human to go in and look to make sure that it was done the way that the team has decided was the right way. And I think that is that's fine, but I want most of those conventions to disappear into the framework. Like, one of the things that I like, this is actually one of the reasons why I started pushing for the statically rendered front ends, was because it allowed me to, through convention, enforce good behavior, so that you had to, like, as a dev, if you wanted to do something in a different way, you had to sort of opt in very intentionally into a different process, because you had a use case that supported it. And I think the part that's hard about a lot of these frameworks that don't have that, like, default, this is why I'm such a big fan of Astro, right? Like, it's static until you very explicitly tell it not to be. And then when you explicitly tell it not to be, usually you have a reason because you did extra work to make it do that thing. And what I like about that is that it sort of like builds this automatic enforcement as opposed to a top-down cultural enforcement that has to go through strict ESLint rules or really strict, how to, like, what would that even be, like ESLint failing tests? Like, I don't know, like but yeah, so it just a little quibble of mine, and one of the reasons that I usually don't reach for Next.js is honestly stuff exactly like that.
I think particularly around caching, and I think that's potentially why they've made some amendments in Next 15, because I think for a lot of folks, caching feels like a performance optimization that you add on rather than you start with by default. And I think that's where, because I think the problem with caching by default is you can introduce bugs that way. Think about an e-commerce app where, your cart doesn't update or something like that. And I think for a lot of folks, it's worse to introduce a bug than it is to have, performance slightly less, because you can work on that, you can iterate with that. And I think in Next.js 15, they've clearly realized that. And there's a few of these 4 caches which are now not on by default. So the data cache isn't on by default, and the client-side cache as well, I believe. So I think there's lessons there for sure.
Great. But so checking here now, whenever we reload, this is updating.
Brilliant.
Now the downside of that, of course, is we are fully re-rendering this page in its entirety on every reload.
Exactly that. Yeah. There's no caching in between the server and the browser, so we're getting a full round trip every time,
which sometimes is good. Like, again, if you have a dashboard and that dashboard is full of data that needs to be up to the second, you never want to cache that. But in a lot of cases, like especially for something like this that we're looking at, if I just want to update the time on the screen and everything else is static, there are probably better ways to solve that don't require the entire page to become dynamic.
Sure.
And also, like, we've introduced bugs where this is now localized to the server it's coming from, to the origin, and not to me, the user. So we'd have to now figure out, how do we figure out the requester's time zone and things like that. So in this case, like what we're doing here, the real solution would be, let's just do this in JavaScript. Like, let me put this in a browser, like a client-side call, so that I can show it localized to the browser that's using it, right? But I digress, because that's not what we're talking about today. So let's go a little bit further here. So we've learned how we've got static pages. We can force them to be dynamic. What about, like, let's see, there's a few other things that happen here. The one that I know off the top of my head is images, because there's that image component for Next. There's all the stuff it's kind of fancy stuff on Vercel that'll do the resizing and it supposedly caches them and all those things. So does that just work?
Absolutely, yeah. So we leverage another one of our platform primitives, which is the Netlify image CDN. So all of that image transformation is offloaded from the origin server. So that would be interesting to have a look at. I think it would be also really interesting to have a look at, actually, coming back to what you said about the timestamp not being a really representative example. We should probably try getting some data in here, some actual data from an API, and we can sort of see how that. And then we've got 2 levels of caching. We've got the data cache, but sure, if we can look at images if you want.
What do you want to do first?
Since we're kind of in this mode of talking about caching, do you want to have a play around with some data first?
Yeah, let's do it. So I can do, what is it, API? API.github.com users, and then we can do I just get to put in a login and go? Yeah. Okay. So this will be an easy one for us to do, because then we can also play with some of the like fetching part of it. So remind me, how should we do like a dynamic route so that we can change it and see different data?
I think what would be really useful to show, because I think what, like a use case that a lot of people have is that they might have some content coming from like a content management system or something like that. and they would want to update that content and then have that specific route with the content on change. That's going to require, I mean, either you've got a handy CMS that you know how to call an API for, or
I do. This is my this is the Learn with Jason API, so it's got all the episode data in and stuff, so we can build that out if we want.
Great. And then we can make a change to it, can we?
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's do that.
Okay. So let's go. Actually, why don't we just go straight to sanity? Because I think if we're gonna like get the changes right out of the gate, then we should probably use the sanity APIs. And for me to do that, I need more than I've got. I set all this up so long ago that I forget how I actually use it. Is it manage.sanity.io? How many of my details are going to immediately become visible when I do this?
Everyone look away.
Where's learnwithjason.dev? Here we go. Okay, so then I'm going to take us off the screen share just in case this shows an API key.
Sure.
So I've got those are webhooks, but I don't need those. Add API token. But what's the actual API? Oh boy. Somewhere in here is a button that will let me get at the data. Come on. I know how to do this. An API. The API itself, cores, origins, tokens. Come on. Project ID. And then in the studio, we do something like this. Does it just show me in this? Jason, oh, come on. Okay, I think I got this. Yeah. All right. I got this. So we have. I'm going to bring this back up so that everybody can see. And so it makes a call to the project ID.api.sanity.io, and then you hit this general thing here, and then we have to send in a token, which I will be able to get, and that will let us do the thing. So why don't I get this? Yeah, here's the request, right? Mm-hmm. And then if I come out into here, and what is it here? It's not loader.
No. So the Next.js data fetching is literally just with a fetch. So you want to kind of define an async function called something like get content or get data or
yeah, we'll call it get episodes.
Lovely.
And we'll do one of these, and then I can response equals
await
fetch.
Yeah.
Await fetch. And then I need to put in one of these.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that, I can probably do a simpler query in here. Let's just get type equals episode and dump everything else. And then that should give us 405. Wow. That's a lot of episodes. Okay. And then I think I can even let's simplify this a little bit. I believe I can do 0 to 10.
Mm-hmm.
That's not right. Is it 10 items? Okay. So that's far simpler. And will give us I think, an easier time with that request. So then if we come in here and set that in here, get rid of this part. Okay, so that almost works. It's going to be missing the header. And that header is going to be an environment variable that I'll need to set. So that's headers. Nope, not whatever that was. Oh my God, come on. Wait, why did it just import something? VS Code, you're betraying me right now. Just chill and let's be. So then it's authorization. And that's going to be a bearer token. And that bearer token is going to be, is it process.env in Next? Do you remember?
It is, yeah. But this is going to, let me just think about this. We're going to need to add that environment variable
in Netlify, right?
Got it, yeah.
So we're going to call this Sanity API token. I think I'm making a lot of assumptions about how all this works. Why are you yelling at me? Oh, because we don't have this double quoted or double bracketed. And then once we've got that done, we can do like an if response.okay. We'll, I don't know, throw an error. And then down here, we'll get the data will be await response.json. And then we can do something with it. We'll do data. We'll just return data. And then I need to go get that Sanity API token, which I'm again going to go off screen for. And let's see, that was in this page here. Got an API token. Okay, and then we're going to head over to go into the Netlify dashboard, into site configuration, and then environment variables. Going to add a variable, and this variable will be the same for all deploy contexts, and I'm calling it Sanity API token. We're going to hide it so that I can bring the screen back up and show everybody what I'm working on right now. So this is the environment variable we call the Sanity API token. I've got a token in here. I'm going to create that variable. And now that I've done that, we theoretically can just run this.
Yeah, we could try doing it in dev just to check that works. And I suppose we'll need to put that response somewhere in the output, in the markup.
What just happened? No package JSON.
I think you can just
do
wrong? NTL dev without the NPX.
Here we go.
Oh, hang on a second. We're getting the version. Oh, sorry. You'll have to stop that actually. Sorry, because we haven't set this up in the CLI yet. We haven't installed the TOML file. My bad. Sorry.
I'm also, so I have a lot of issues with the way that, okay. I'm starting to regret my choice to try to do Sanity.
I've got a plan B. If it gets too much, I've got a plan B.
Okay, maybe let's go to your plan B, because I'm a little worried that this isn't going to work on the first try, and like debugging this locally is going to be hard given the Netlify CLI stuff.
Sure. I have a public API which doesn't need an environment variable. Plus, basically it delivers a random quote from Stranger Things every time you hit it.
Perfect.
And that's good because it kind of mimics someone changing something in the content management system. So yeah, I'll drop. Can I drop something in the chat? Or
we've got a private chat here that you can drop things into, and I can copy there.
That's the one.
Okay, so this is nope. I am copying the link address. I'm going to drop it right here.
Yep.
Okay, and then so if we just hit this in the browser, we get an array of quotes. So good. We'll get our response. We'll call this, why don't we just do like at 0. And then down here, we can do like a pre-tag and we'll JSON stringify. We'll have to figure out how to get that quote, and then null2. And that'll be, wow, Jeebus. Okay. So how do we get this data out? We just call like quote equals.
Yeah,
call this get quote.
Yeah, you'll need to await it, I believe. Yeah.
Okay, and I can just make this async, and it's not a problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we'll run that, and then let me just double check that this works. npm run dev. Okay, and we're out in 3,000. And there we go. Okay, and every time I refresh, it is currently giving me the same. Oh, here we go. There.
Cool.
Okay.
Yep, which is what you expect in dev mode because every route is dynamically rendered. But if we deploy that, we can start talking about the data cache because, as I mentioned, there are 4 levels of caching in Next.js. There's two aren't really relevant to this discussion because they're more you've got the client-side React cache, which happens on browser navigation. That's changing in Next 15, and that's not going to be enabled by default now. You've also got the request memoization cache, which just makes sure within a single request, Next never calls like a fetch like this more than once. But we can ignore those because the big things are the root cache, and in this instance, the data cache. So now that we have made a fetch call here, Next.js understands that we're pulling data into that page. And in Next.js 14, by default, that response will be cached. So
without this,
yes. Oh, sorry, I forgot we had that in there. Yeah. So we should.
So if we take this out, then it will cache this response.
Exactly, and you've kind of got caching at 2 levels going on there because that fetch will be cached, plus the route itself will be cached.
And that's because Next patches it like monkey patches fetch.
It does, yeah. That's one of the things it does.
And that's supposed to come out in 15 because they decided that was a mistake, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
okay.
They decided that the data, and you can see why, because in an API like this, where you're getting fresh results each time, you're going to upload that to a platform somewhere, and it's not going to change, and you're going to think, well, hold on a second, that doesn't make any sense to me. So I think that was an important, necessary change. But since it is like that in Next 14, to save us continually redeploying, should we also set up a route handler which we can call to on-demand revalidate this page?
Sure. How do I do that?
Cool. So if you just create a folder, and we'll call it revalidate or something like that within your app folder.
Okay.
And then a file within that called root.ts.
TS?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, like route?
Sorry. Yeah, my bad.
Sorry. Wait. British root or American root?
Got you.
Okay.
Cool. So in this one, we just need to export an async function called get.
Async function, and it's a capital get?
Yeah, exactly. Which takes the request as a parameter.
Okay.
And then, oh yeah.
And is that like the just a browser request?
Yes. Yeah, I believe
Okay.
so. Yeah. It might be a next request actually saying that. Let me,
Oh, so I need to import next request?
that might be the case, and I'm just double checking. No, it is just a standard web API request.
Oh, nice. Okay, cool. Okay, and then in here, what am I doing?
So you've got a couple of options in Next. You can revalidate a path, or you can tag your data with cache tags and revalidate kind of a whole bunch of data en masse. But for just this simple example, let's just do revalidate path, which you'll need to import from Next cache.
Revalidate path from next cache.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we want to I suppose it's just the root. So yeah, just that exactly. And
The
then
root.
yeah, exactly. Root. We'll get there. We'll get there. And I think we can send that without any other parameters. But you might want to return just a response that, yeah, I don't know, maybe like return next response. Oh yeah, which will need to. I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether it needs to be a next response that gets returned.
Let's see if it yells at me.
Okay.
Just something like that, so it doesn't get sad.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. Then when I run this, it says compiled. It's not yelling at me, and I just call revalidate.
Yeah,
like that.
Yeah, although this isn't going to show you much in dev, unfortunately, because the root page is being dynamically rendered on every request. So we might have to deploy this one to Netlify to see the magic.
Sorry, I'm doing this wrong because I got a 404 when I went to revalidate/route.
Yeah, my bad. Sorry, I may have told you incorrectly. The path for it will just be revalidate without the route.
Okay. I haven't done much with the app directory, so this is all brand new to me. Okay, but it's doing we're getting our response. It's not yelling at me for not using a next response, so I think we're in good shape in terms of functionality. So then if I get, I'm going to have to add everything. We're going to say git commit m and add revalidation endpoint. We'll push that up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so while we're talking about that, I'm just going to do a build real quick.
Sure.
And I just want to, because somebody was saying, why aren't we calling this use Next.js on Netlify? And I think that we're using Netlify as an example, but the part that's interesting to me is what is happening that requires, like, why do we have to do extra work anyways instead of being able to just deploy this anywhere? So you had mentioned earlier that we kind of have to split things up to move them into the right places. So can we just we've got this simple site. Can we walk through a little bit of like what's happening here and how it gets moved around once it's built?
Yeah, absolutely. So do we have a public folder outside of the .next?
Yeah, there's a public folder here.
Yeah. So these have got some static assets in them.
Mm-hmm.
Those are not going to change throughout the lifetime of a deployment. So we know that we can just move them straight up to the Netlify CDN. What would be interesting is, I was wondering whether we should run a build locally, but because if we did that, we could see how the files get moved around. Actually, no, we can't. Sorry, forget that. So essentially, we've got 4 steps. The next runtime will take the things in the public directory and also the things in the .next static directory, I believe. Yeah, all of this stuff.
Things like CSS, yeah.
Gotcha, yeah. All of that. And we make sure that at the time of deploy is the only thing in your published directory. And that means that Netlify will push that up to the CDN as part of the deploy process. Never going to change as part of that deploy. We've got atomic deploys at Netlify as well, so you can roll back to it and so on and so forth. Then the second thing we do is we take the pre-rendered HTML. So in this instance, for this site, we've only got one page. It's a static page because we haven't got that force dynamic on it, and we're not telling Next at the moment that that's data fetch that we're doing shouldn't be cached. So Next.js will go, fine, that's static. So you should find in the server folder there, under app, index.html.
And here's our cached.
Yeah, it's the pre-rendered HTML. And that's important, especially when you've got a larger Next.js site or you're calling kind of expensive APIs that might take a while, and you want to make sure that you're pre-rendering as much as you can at build time. So we can do that work at build time. Next.js will put it into HTML files. You'll also notice that there's a bunch of other associated files. So we've got index.meta and index.rsc. This is the React server component data that goes along with that, and some various metadata that Next uses, and we package that all together and put it up into blob storage. And the reason for that is because that HTML that you can see there might change during the course, during the lifetime of a deploy. Because as we're going to see, hopefully, if someone does an on-demand revalidation or it's got time-based revalidation, then a new request to that route might make it revalidate, and so it's got to be in a mutable place. And if we put that on the CDN, we can't change it after it gets deployed. So we have to put it into some kind of persistent but mutable storage, which is why we use the Netlify blob store. The third thing we do is create a server handler to run the Next.js code, and we do that by if you close up the app folder. Actually, sorry. Yeah, maybe keep it open. You can see, as well as the HTML and meta and RSC, there's a page.js file. Yeah. So this is all the server code that Next.js will use to render that page, which is important because, as I mentioned, anything can be re-rendered at any point. So even though we've got the pre-rendered HTML at build time, and that's going up to the blob store, Next.js needs to know how to render this route on demand when necessary. And so this is all of the code required to do that. And we make sure that all of the server code gets bundled up with all the dependencies plus your user code into a Netlify function, which will run when that route needs re-rendering at request time.
Okay. And then we've also got the route.js. Is that getting bundled as well?
Yeah, so that's a specific type of route called a route handler.
Okay.
That works in the same way. So it is also pre-rendered. And this is a really interesting point that might be useful for your watchers and listeners, because in Next.js 14, route handlers or route handlers are like the one we've just created, the revalidate one, are also cached by default. So that can be quite confusing to folks, because you might be creating a handler which is like it's an API endpoint essentially, but the response from it is going to be cached by default, and that's a Next.js thing that again they've changed in Next 15 because they realized that wasn't intuitive, but it's worth knowing about.
Okay, and so the reason that this is all important to look at is that by default, if I go to deploy my site on a node server or something, the splitting of these files isn't happening. And so everything here, and we're not using middleware, but if there was middleware, you would also be pulling that off to the edge.
Exactly.
So because Next doesn't supply that adapter API, there's no way for platforms to tell Next how to move these files around. So as a platform author or as a user wanting to deploy Next to another platform that's not Vercel, we have to do this work. And so in the case of Netlify, these get moved into Netlify functions, into the Netlify edge functions. In the case of something like Cloudflare, it might be, instead of blob storage, you're using cloud. There's that D1, or I can't remember what they call it, but they've got their own blob storage. And then if you were doing it on AWS, you would need to deploy parts to Lambda and parts to S3 and parts to CloudFront. And that would be to kind of replicate the functionality of what Vercel is doing so that you actually get the same performance and behavior. And so that's why we're talking about this, is that it's not just a matter of like, deploy it and it's done. It's if you want to be able to get the actual performance that Next is capable of, you have to do more. And in the absence of an adapter API, there are a lot of manual steps, and these are what Rob has gone through with his team at Netlify to get this thing running. And so that's why we're looking at this today. That's why I think this is important to talk about, because it shows like just how complex it can be to run modern software well. And I think that is worth calling out and kind of talking about. So with that being said, we now have here our quote. And when I reload the page, I get the same quote.
Yeah, we're going to need to deploy this to Netlify. So did you, is this, this is perfect. We're here. Cool.
So now if I revalidate, it should theoretically. Okay, so this is my revalidation. Mm-hmm. And now I'm going to go back to the home page and reload. Mm-hmm. Oh, it didn't do it.
What have we done wrong?
That is a great question. Did I have to await that revalidate path?
Let me double check. So no. So revalidate path.
String. Do you skip the leading thing? Like, do I need to?
No, that's definitely right. I've got a similar build doing something exactly the same, and I'm using a forward slash. Let's look at the page again, the root page. So we're getting a quote. We're fetching that,
and we return the data,
mm-hmm.
and then we display that straight on the page.
Straight on the page.
And we're also, I'm noticing, not seeing, like when I reload, I'm not seeing my. So my revalidation is working, or at least it's returning my thing. And then when I come back, oh, here it goes. It did it that time.
Oh, that's interesting. I tell you what, we might have fallen foul of the fact that root handlers are cached, actually, because I said that and then we didn't do anything about it. We need to add the force dynamic to the root handler.
Oh, wow. Oh. Okay, so then export const dynamic equals force dynamic.
Yeah, that's the one.
And that will prevent this from caching. Yeah. So in git commit, and we'll say fix force route revalidation to be dynamic. Git push. Right? And so yeah, because it looked like if I was in there and I like refreshed it a few times and then went to the homepage and refreshed, then it works. So the cache is maybe like stale while revalidate or something.
Yeah, quite. I mean, the expected behavior is that the first time you after you revalidate, I believe the first response will be served stale while the regeneration happens in the background, and then the second response you'll get the revalidated data.
Mm-hmm. And then while we're waiting for that to deploy, there's a question from Michael about why wouldn't you want to host Next.js on Vercel? I mean, there are a lot of reasons, and I think like the most common ones for me are all of my sites are on different infrastructure. So, for example, when I was at IBM, we already had full deployment setups for like everything. We had the way that we ran node servers. We had the way that we ran CDNs. And so we like the idea of introducing a new vendor was kind of a non-starter. And then for other companies, for other startups, you put all your stuff in one place. Like maybe we're running everything on Fly.io. To have to put one site, one framework on a different vendor introduces new processes, new API keys, new costs, new people who have to know how everything works. And it introduces complexity in a way that can be really challenging on teams. And then also, like, I just like having choices. I want to know that if I am using Next.js and Vercel pivots and decides that they're only going to ship Java, I don't want, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to be stuck like, crap, now I can't use Next.js anymore because Vercel doesn't want to host it. Or like the alternative and potentially more likely thing is Vercel just took a giant round of funding. At some point, they're going to have to get returns. And so prices will probably go up. Things will probably change on the platform. And as a user, I don't want to know that I want to be sure that if they do changes on the Vercel platform that I don't like, I don't have to then migrate all of my sites off of Next.js in order to keep running my business. I want to be able to move those sites to another platform confidently, right? Now, I'm not saying any of that will happen, but these are the types of things that I worry about when it becomes clear that a framework is kind of built for a given platform. Is it starts to remove optionality, and it starts to put me in a weird position where I might get very short notice windows to have to make major company decisions based on the behavior of a single vendor, and that freaks me out.
Sure, and also that we're building these platform primitives with the open web in mind. So for example, things like we're looking at PPR, which is something that Next.js is looking at introducing in the near future, and we've been looking at ways to develop that, but specifically, and this is always our goal, to do it in a way that we can leverage potential with all frameworks, and we've been discussing it with different framework authors as well. So Netlify is a platform that is trying to keep options open for developers. So that's good in a wider sense, but also as a developer, it's good because you have those choices when you're on the platform.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, like, choice is never a bad thing. and a lack of choice is almost always not necessarily a bad thing, but a risk. And so to me, that's sort of my major concern. But that being said, is Netlify the first platform to achieve such compatibility? I actually don't know the answer to that question. I feel like people have managed to get it running on, like, SST, I think, is another platform that's figured it out pretty well. You know of any others?
Yeah, I mean, there's a slew of platforms which kind of have Next.js support. I know that Firebase has just launched something, but there's support and there's support. There's like a spectrum of support for Next.js, and I think that some of the platforms, for example, will run middleware at the origin. Some of them don't have the same performance benefits. Some of them, they're similar to their sort of self-hosting option, except just in a serverless box, without all of that extra stuff that we've done to ensure that we're getting parity with Vercel in terms of the other metrics like performance.
Mm-hmm. And so I managed to, I burned like 10 minutes trying to figure out that sanity thing. And so now we're just about out of time. Sure. So we probably don't have time to fully implement other features, but let's talk a little bit through it. So the way that this is working right now is that when we're deploying, we, because Netlify has access to the repo and everything, it can say, we know this is the next site based on its dependencies or whatever it is. And because of that, we're going to handle the build output in this way to make sure that it takes advantage of the capabilities of Netlify's platform. If we were using Astro or Nuxt or any of the others, Quick, et cetera, Remix, that have adapter APIs, what would happen is the adapter itself would tell the platform, put these files here, put these files over here, so that we take advantage of the CDN, the edge, the serverless functions, the static assets, et cetera. So here, we're building an external adapter API for Next.js is what we're dealing with here. But what's interesting about that to me is that all of the things that we're using, so you mentioned we're caching, but that's a caching layer that we have access. You mentioned things like cache tags, and that's something that we can use with any framework. And then when we get to the image layer, one of the things that I really love about the image layer on Netlify, and like I've always used Cloudinary, like they've been my go-to for a long time, because it's like, here's an image, you can do whatever you need to, you can resize it, you can change the quality, etc. And it has zero idea or interest in knowing what even like programming language you're using. It's just a URL. Sure. And I think that's that's how you're managing is that how you're managing the Next.js image stuff?
Exactly that. Yeah. It's a very similar service.
Any other like low level things that are worth calling out about how you're managing the feature parity, and anything people should be aware of if they decide they're going to go roll this on their own? I think the image service is a big one. Like, you would need something like Cloudinary if you don't have an image service built into your platform.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, but the image CDN, along with the blob storage and the advanced caching, they're primitives that you can use on Netlify. I definitely wouldn't suggest rolling your own Next.js runtime. But essentially what we're doing is we are utilizing those primitives in order to provide the functionality that Next.js the framework leverages, I suppose. But what's really interesting is that if you are using a different framework, so for example, if you're using Astro, Astro doesn't have an inbuilt concept of ISR, for example, or on-demand revalidation. But there's nothing to stop you building that using Netlify's primitives. And we've actually got a guide on our developer hub for people interested in that.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because you can have the same setup where you've got a page fetching some data, but you might not want that page to be dynamically rendered on every request. So you can use for example, with Astro, you can do Astro response.headers and then add a header, and literally the header you need to add is Netlify -cdn-cache-control, and then you can instruct our cache to cache the response to that page for, I don't know, maybe a week or however, or even for a year. And then you can do the same thing. You can create a root handler, a little bit like we've done here in Next. I forget the terminology in Astro, but then you can use the Netlify purge cache API to purge that cache on demand. So you could set up a route where that accepts a webhook from a CMS, for example. And when that request comes in, you can call Netlify's purge cache API to bust the cache for that page, and then that request will make it through to the server and be re-rendered. So you've got exactly the same functionality as Next.js, but just using the platform primitives that Netlify provides, which I think is really powerful, because you can use that with other frameworks, or even without a framework, you can just use it with Netlify functions. So we're trying to open it up, essentially.
Yeah, I think that is very exciting to me, and the again, like, betting on the web is great. It gives the framework authors a chance to get really good performance on any platform through their adapter APIs, and making Netlify the one that has like the easiest to use primitives, I think is like, if I was building a company, and one of the reasons I joined Netlify back in 2018 for the years that I was there was because it seemed like, instead of saying we want to control things, it was, we want to provide the best tools so that people want to be here, right? And I think that's sort of a fundamental, like, somebody asked, what was the question? It was, would the lack of support for Next make me think about choosing a different stack? Like, one of the reasons I don't use Next, I don't advise people to choose Next.js for their projects, and I wouldn't personally, I would actually argue pretty strongly against it if a team I was on wanted to use it, is because the implication of the actions of the team is that they aren't interested in supporting other platforms. They're like, you can do whatever you want, but there's no action that supports, like, will help you. Right. And to me, that is a sign that it doesn't, the early warnings, I usually trust my gut. And the early warning is that if things get hard, it's going to get hard to use Next. And so that to me makes me not want to use it. And the reason that I lean toward platforms like Netlify and why I like the concept of betting on the open web, why I'm such a big fan of, get the defaults right and then let people succeed, is because it's a fundamentally open. Like, you can't control that. If you give somebody a primitive, you don't get to control, like, you can't control that primitive. Anybody can implement it. That's the whole point of using web standards. So by building things that are stacked on top of web standards in a very compliant way, so that anybody using any feature of the web is able to take advantage of them, you have created a fundamentally open platform where the thing you're competing on is being good at it, not on controlling it. And that to me is the bet that I'll make every time. I want to work with the companies that are fighting to be good at things, not to control things. And with that, we're out of time. So, Rob, any parting words for everybody before we shut it down?
Just that options are good.
Options are very good. All right. So I'm going to give one more shout out to Rob's LinkedIn here. So make sure you go and make a new connection. I'll give a shout out to Netlify. Thank you, Netlify. They also are the sponsor of the closed captions on this show. So I very much appreciate that. And thank you to Vanessa, who's been doing the captioning today. Let me get one more link up there to that, so that if you want to check those out, they're at lwj.dev/captions. While you're checking out things on the internet, make sure that you go and take a look at the schedule that we got coming up, because it is going to be a whole lot of fun. Next week, I'm back on my Tuesday streams. Excited. I haven't been able to do those for a while because I've been traveling for good reason. There's a lot of fun stuff coming. Stay tuned. And then on Thursday, we've got Brandon Roberts coming in to teach us about analog.js, which is a really exciting approach to Angular that I've never seen before, and I think you're going to like it. So make sure you mark your calendar. Rob, thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
Chat, thank you as always for hanging out. We will see you all next time.